Metasploit is the most widely used hacking framework. It's a powerful tool that can help you in all phases of hacking, from information gathering to post-exploitation. There's two versions, a commercial version and a free version. And in this course, we'll only discuss the free version, which is open source and can be used from the command line. In order to use it, open a terminal, the command line. And let me just enlarge this window a bit. And then you type MSF console. So that's Metasploit Framework console, MSF console. If you type that and press enter, you'll enter the Metasploit console. From there, you can do all kinds of hacking things. Now you'll see it takes some time to initialize, and they always show some banner here. They also show you the version, the number of available exploits, payloads, and some other information. And at the bottom, you have the command line prompts, so you can there type commands in there and get output. So once you typed MSF console, you should have this terminal prompt available. And from here you can type commands. For example, we can type the ls command, short for list, which lists the contents of the folder, which lists the contents of the folder from which Metasploit was launched. So you'll see where you start the Metasploit, shows you the content. So let me open a new terminal and let's enter some other directory. So let's say cd/ or cd desktop. You'll see some file contents here. If I start Metasploit console, it will, and then type the list command after it started, you'll see the same files. So it always shows you the files in the directory that you started Metasploit. And some other basic commands you can do is the ping command. So the ping command checks if a computer is online. So for example, ping with some computer on the internet, let's say Google's IP address or Google's domain name server IP address, and you'll see the computer is online. So that's just some basic commands. If you want to limit that, you can type -c, for example, 4, and then it will only check 4 times if that computer is online. So the computer address, the IP address is specified here, which consists of 4 numbers from 0 to 255. So those numbers make up the computer address or the internet protocol address. So those are just some basic commands. Of course, it works for any IP address, so and for websites. So for example, you can type some website here and it will check if that website is online. So that's the ping command. Of course, the ping command also works directly from the console. So if we would type ping here, you'll see it works. So those commands are both available in the Linux console as well as in Metasploit. Now you can type clear to clear the screen. If you want, you can type the history command, which shows you the commands you ran before. And you'll see I've been using Metasploit quite a bit. So if you type history, you'll see commands that you ran in the past. Now let's use Metasploit to collect some information about our target. So on our target will be a server. So we'll install some server software. Now, of course, we need to know our target's IP address or computer address in order to attack it. So we can type IP adder space show, which shows the computer address. So in this case, that's this address. Now from Metasploit, we can ping it, of course, to see if we have connectivity to this target computer. And you'll see, yes, we do. And we can also gather information about our targets, like which services are running. Is the computer running a mail server? Is it running an SSH server, which allows remote control? Is it running a web server or maybe a screen sharing server? So we can collect all kinds of information about which services are running using a technique called port scanning. And using the Metasploit console, we can do that. So we type use auxiliary scanner port scan TCP. Then we need to set the ports we want to scan. So let's say we want to scan for port 22, which is usually remote control of the computer, SSH. Let's see if scan for a web server, and maybe also for some mail server. So those port numbers are usually used for those services. So you can use the command set ports, and then we set the target IP address. So let's set the target IP address. And the next thing to do is just type run and press enter. So you'll see it scans the target computer. And it's told it has one open port, port 22, which is the SSH port or allows remote control. And that's also the one we just installed with the command open SSH server. So that installs remote control service. So that's how you can use a basic attack or basic information gathering using Metasploit. So let's take a look at more basic of the Metasploit console or the Metasploit framework. Now, in order to use the Metasploit framework, you use the console, so the terminal. Now on Kali Linux that's installed by default, so you can type msf console, and let's look at how the basic Metasploit console works. When you start Metasploit console, you always have some graphic and some general information. Now Metasploit contains many exploits and payloads. So if I, for example, type show space payloads, it will show you all kind of payloads for Metasploit. So that's show space payloads, and you'll see there's stuff for Windows here. If you scroll up on the right, it's very easy to see that it's for Windows. So payloads and exploits for Windows, and you can see for different programming language. You have some stuff for Mac here, and also Linux exploits. So how do you use any of this? For example, in the past there was a famous exploit called the Eternal Blue vulnerability or exploit, and we can search for that. So we can type search Eternal Blue, and you'll see, okay, we have an exploit for Eternal Blue here. And how do we use it? So whenever you want to use any of these exploits, you can type use with the name of the exploit. And we type paste and press enter. And the next thing to do is to configure it. So we can type show options, and you can do this for any exploit. You can type show options. So first type use with your exploit or payloads, and then type show options, which shows you all variables you can configure. So we can set the rhost, the rport. In this case, we can set the Samba domain. So of course, this will differ depending on the exploit. But whenever you type show options, you'll see what you need to set. So in this case, we can set rhost to some variable, the target host. So let's say that is some target. We can specify the port. So that is how you would set the variables of the exploit, and finally you would type run to run it. So that's basically how you can use Metasploit console for exploits. So let's do that again, Metasploit console. And we'll search for maybe a reverse shell. So there's many different platforms here. This is for Windows, and let me just find one. Let's say we are looking for this is for OS X, so let's say we're searching for Linux. Linux reverse shell. So a reverse shell is a shell that gives you complete access to a computer. So we'll say use this payload. We'll type show options. Then in this case we need to set a listen address and a listening port. So let's see what our IP address is. So that's this IP address. Lhost. That's one of the options, and the other option we need to set. And then you would type run to run the exploit. So that's the basic use of the Metasploit console. One of the first things you'll always want to do when attacking someone is scan their ports. So we have the victim's computer running here. I typed IP-adder show to show the IP address of the victim. So this is the IP address of the victim. And we'll use the Metasploit console to scan for open ports. So for open services that we can connect to. Now we might be able to connect to a screen sharing service or a database or an SSH server or something else. But in order to find out in which ways we can attack, what we need to do is to do a port scan. So we'll first start open a terminal on Kali. We just reduce the terminal size a bit. And now I'll type Metasploit Framework console. That will start the Metasploit console. Next, we'll type search port scan. And you'll see there are different port scanners available for Metasploit. So we can use any of them to use port scanning. But what we'll use is the TCP port scan. So we'll just use this port scanner, the default normal port scanner. Type auxiliary scanner. You can press tab instead of typing the full word. Port scan TCP. Now we can set options. So we'll type show options to see what options we can set. And you'll see there are several options here. Obviously we need to specify the target host, so the rhost value. So we'll type set rhosts and then the IP address of the target. Then we'll set the ports. So let's say port from 1 to let's say 500. You can set a number of threads, so that would be faster, or the timeout speed, and some other options, but we'll just set these two variables and type run, and that should execute our port scan. And it did. And you'll see on the target it has two ports open, port 22 and port 80. Now every port always has a certain service running on it, and this is most of the cases it's the same. So port 80 is usually or almost always a web server port, and port 22 is a shell or SSH port, and SSH is a tool you can use to remotely control a computer. So if I open Firefox, and I said port 80 is always used as a web server, so let's just type the IP address of the computer and see what they're running on their web server. And you'll see it's a bit slow. So it tried to connect using secure PS, and you'll see in this case it doesn't return anything, and it's trying to connect using HTTPS instead of directly connecting to it. So if you connect to that IP address directly, you should see the web page that is running on the computer, because port 80 is almost always a web server. And as I mentioned, port 22 is almost always an SSH server, unless they change the defaults. And SSH you can use in the command line. You can type SSH and then the IP address. So you'll see in this case I had already connected to it before, so let me fix that. So if you try to connect to the port 22, that usually is always the SSH, which is a remote shell. So allows you to control the computer. So you type yes, and then you'll see we need a username, because probably they're not using Kali, in this case they're using Ubuntu, and we'll need a password. So it is running SSH. So using the port scan with Metasploit, you can find out which ports are running. So type the use this, then show options, and set the target IP address, the ports you want to scan. So the range, you can scan a larger range if you want to, is up to 65,535. But usually most of the services are running somewhere between 1 and 500. And then just type run, and it will return to you which ports are open for you to connect to. And once you know those ports, you can do all kind of things, right? You can try to exploit the software, or you can just try all the passwords. So for example, here when we connect to the computer, so let's say we know the user is Ubuntu and we don't know the password, what we could do is use an automated program to start trying in a list of hundreds of passwords or thousands or even millions of passwords and see if the password isn't there. So a brute force attack. So anyway, you can use the Metasploit console to do the TCP port scan and find out which ports are open. So as the name suggests, Metasploit is an exploitation framework. So it contains many exploits. If you start MSF console, it will tell you how many exploits is included with Metasploit. So you'll see here, it contains 2196 exploits that you can use. Now you can search for a specific exploit by typing search. So let's say search exploits for WordPress, and you'll see many exploits for the WordPress blog system. WordPress is a popular blogging software on the internet. Or if, for example, maybe you're interested in exploiting Windows, you can type search exploit Windows, and you'll see different exploits for the Windows system or software related to Windows. So by typing show payloads, you show all of them. So all of them. And if you want to use any exploit, you type use with the exploit name. So let's say we are interested in the Eternal Blue exploit, which is a very old exploit. Okay, it's not even included anymore. Let's say an exploit with 011. So what is this exploit? So if you are curious about any exploit, you can type info, and it will tell you the target system. So in this case, this is an exploit for Windows 2000 and Windows XP. So again, a very old exploit. And the way it works is you need to set the rhost variable and the rport variable. You can set those using the set commands. So set rhost with the IP address. Whatever the target's IP address is, you need to set the port. And finally, when you want to run the exploit, you type exploit, and that starts the exploit. Now in this case, the target is unreachable because there is no Windows XP or Windows 2000 system running on that target IP address. So let's try that out. We have Windows 2000 computer here running. We'll need to find the IP address of our target computer. So we'll type cmd start run cmd ipconfig, and ipconfig shows us the IP address of our target computer. So it says IP address with your target. Then what this exploit will do is it will crash the computer. You'll see this module exploits for overflow. When exploiting the system on XP, run it twice. Name it also says upgrade down level server. So if you have a Windows 2000 server, not the case anymore, but you would be able to crash it. So how does it work? First we have to type use and then the exploit. So we already did that. You'll type use with the exploit name. Then you need to set some parameters. So if you type show options, you'll see the parameters that you need to set. So you need to set the target host and the target port. 8.237, you'll see that's the same IP address. And we'll need to set the port. Now we'll type exploit to run the exploit. And what you'll see is that the Windows system will then crash. So you'll see now the system is crashed. System shut down in 56 seconds. So we were able to use this exploit and to crash this computer. Now if that is a workstation, of course it wouldn't matter. But if that is a server with 1 billion of customers, of course that would be terrible for a company. So this is just one exploit. We're exploiting Windows 2000 here. Of course there's many exploits and many targets, so you can run exploits for Windows 2000, XP, Vista, Windows 7, Windows 10, for different Linux computers, for macOS computers, and so on. So this is how you would run an exploit using Metasploit console. With the search command you can search for different exploits. With MSF Venom, you can create payloads. So MSF Venom allows you to create payloads for the Metasploit Framework. So this can be a PHP, Windows executable. It can be a Linux ELF file, Mac executable, DMG. So for different systems. And these payloads can then be run on the victim's computer and give you complete access to their system. And so if I type MSF Venom dash payloads, will show you all possible target systems. Let me make it full screen. So MSF Venom -L payloads, which will list all the possible payloads you can create. So you'll see you can create payloads for Windows systems. And if you scroll up, there's Linux in there and really lots of them. There's DLL. You see Linux here. So Linux payloads. Command line and Android, really all kind of systems. So the idea is that we use the program MS Venom to create a program which the victim then will run, and it will give us complete access to their computer. So in order to do that, we type the command MSF Venom -p with the payload. So the payload that we'll use here is of course a payload for the Windows system. And what we want to do is to create a reverse shell. So for example, we can create the shell for Windows. So we'll type Windows shell reverse TCP. Then we need to specify the IP address of our attacker's computer. The program will connect to our attacker's computer. So we need to know our IP address. You can do that using IP address show or ifconfig. So IP address show will list your IP address. Now, if you're on the same network, you can use this IP address. If you're if the computer is not on the same network, you'll have to get a VPS like a DigitalOcean or Vultr in order that the victim can connect to your computer. So you'll have to use Kali in the cloud if you want that, if you're not on the same network. So we have the IP address, and let me close this. So we'll type lhost is with the IP address and then the port. So let's pick 4444. Then you need to specify the file format. So every Windows program is a .exe. So it has an exe as extension for executable program. So this is different on every system. For example, Android has APK as runnable programs, Linux has ELF, macOS has DMG, and Windows has exe. So MSF Venom needs to know what kind of executable it needs to make. So -f exe, then greater than, and then specify your file name. For example, bad.exe. So that will create the program, the malicious program that the victim will then run. Now, you notice that we can create different shells. So as payload, we now specify shell reverse TCP, which is a basic Windows command prompt. But a more powerful prompt you can create is the interpreter shell. So let's change this and we'll turn it into interpreter and reverse TCP. So the interpreter shell is more powerful. So press enter with the command and you'll see now it created the program. So you'll see final size exe. You'll see the executable has been created. So the next thing to do is to get this executable on the victim's computer. So maybe you put it on a USB disk, or you send it by email, or you send a link. So like download this one or something like that. Now in this case it's named bad.exe, so probably the victim won't run any program that's named bad.exe, but you never know. Like you can give it any name. For example, maybe we'll name it calc.exe, so that it looks like the Windows calculator. And you'll see it creates a new program calc.exe, and it created that in the home directory. So you'll see calc.exe here as malicious program, and really you can name it anything you want. So per program you name you want, you can choose any name you want. The main idea is that the program goes to the victim's computer, and the victim then has to run that program on his computer. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the main idea is that the victim runs the program. Let me remove this file. So the main idea is that the victim runs the program, but when it runs the program, it connects to your computer. So in order for it to connect, your computer needs to be listening for connections. You can do that using MSF console -q. So that will start the Metasploit console. Type use exploit multi-handler. Then we need to specify the payload. So set payload with the same payload as you configured for your executable. Make it full screen. Now we need to set some options. So if you type show options, you'll see options here. We need to specify our listener IP address and our port. So we set our IP address. And we set our port, which is the same port as the program we created earlier. So I closed the window, but the port we used before was 4444. You'll see when we created the program, we used the same port. Now you can pick any port number between 1 and 6535, as long as you pick the same port number for when you're creating the executable. So in this case 4444, and the same port listening. So those need to be the same, but you can pick any number. And next we type run. So you'll see the Metasploit starts listening now. And once we start the program, it should give us complete access to their computer. So now you'll see we now have the interpreter shell, and we have complete access into their computer. So for example, if I type the command dir here, you'll see it just doesn't fit into the screen, but you'll see we're in the desktop. We have the bad.exe here and the desktop ini file, and now we can do anything in his computer. For example, we can do all kind of file system commands. So we can change the directory, of course, like cd ... dir, and like you can browse around in the computer, cd desktop there, those kind of things. You can output a file using the cat command, so you can read any file. For example, we can use desktop.ini, and it will output the contents of that file. So in this case, desktop.ini contains some weird information, but you can do that for any file. So cat will output the file. You can delete files. So if you say del and then some file name, you can delete it. You can edit files as well. If you type, for example, edit and with the file name, you can list files. So ls or dir. You can make directories. You see a directory has been created using our attacker's computer. You can remove directories. You'll see on the victim computer the directory disappeared. You can also download and upload files. For example, we can download desktop.ini to our computer. Now, if I go to the folder here, you'll see we have desktop.ini on our computer. Now, we can also upload files. So if we type upload from our computer, for example, we have the text file here. So that's just a regular text file. We can upload that to the victim's computer. If we type upload, you see that file has been created on his computer. You can get more privileges in the system, so you can try to become the administrator of the system. You can execute programs. So for example, execute -f and then the program name. For example, we can start calculator or notepad or whichever programs you want. You can capture the screen, so you can take a screenshot. If you just type screenshot, it will take a screenshot of the victim's computer. So if you go to the folder here, you'll see it took a screenshot of the victim's computer. So you can do all kinds of things. You can, for example, create new accounts or enable remote desktop, start capturing key presses. Really, you have complete control over the computer. Now, if you're curious about more commands, you can type !enter, and that will show you all commands in the Kali Linux or in the Metasploit shell. So, for example, we can dump hashes. So those are password hashes, which you can use to crack the user's passwords on the system. You can play audio. So you can play audio sound on the victim's computer. You can do things with the webcam, like start a video chat or record video. Some desktop things like control the mouse or control keyboard presses. System commands, for example, you can restart the system or shut it down, or other kind of things like execute commands that I showed you before. Some networking commands and file system commands. So really you have complete control over the system. So if you type you can find more commands. So the Metasploit shell is really one of the best shells because it allows you complete control over the system. There are some other shells like a reverse TCP shell, which allows you to run commands in the system, but you cannot do funny things like dump password hashes or maybe start a webcam or record sounds or those kind of things.